The Paw. 1. Mr. Scratch was pleased. The threats to his kingdom had been taken care of. Mia, Mercy, the crippled runt. And now he could walk his rocks with pride. He admired the hill, the marshes, the scraggly branches, and the rich life he had built with his very own sand. When he reached the chasm, he saw a tuft of fur hovering on the ledge. The fur was ashen, but too soft to be his own. It must have come loose when Mercy had shaken her son by the throat. Mr. Scratch's eye twitched when he remembered Mia's words, "Anything is better than you." He nudged the fur into the chasm and then continued his walk. As the sun set, he climbed to his roost between the pillars of rock at the peak of his kingdom. There he curled up, content in knowing that the kids who'd questioned him were dead at the bottom of the chasm, or about to die in that human trap. Mr. Scratch fell asleep by the howl of the wolves. That night, the scratching began. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Mr. Scratch jerked out of sleep and stared woozily into the night. Odette? The scratching stopped, as if caught. He sniffed, but smelled nothing save the cool leaf mulch at the base of the rocks. He huffed and lay his head back down. The moment he was slipping back to sleep, it came again. Screech, screech, screech. He sat up with a snarl. Odette! Screech, screech. The sound came from outside the rocky pillars surrounding his roost. If I have to come and stop you scratching, you'll regret it. Screech, screech, screech. He rounded to his paws and trotted to a space between the pillars. There was no one there. A moldy stench caught his nose, and he saw the thing lying on the rock. It was a fox's paw. Its fur was gray with cobwebs, its meat wreathed with maggots. He stepped back with disgust. Odette! He howled. Odette! Moments later, the vixen appeared, eyes drooping with sleep. Yes, husband? What is this foul thing doing here? He demanded. Odette blinked at the paw. I don't know. Where's Mercy? He said. In the vixen's quarters. She hasn't stirred. He huffed. Get rid of it. Odette bowed, gathered the rotten paw in her mouth, and took it away. Mr. Scratch returned to his roost and thought no more of it that night. The following day, he marked his territory near the cliffs, the marshes, and the chasm, so that any foxes trying to sneak in would know who they were dealing with. He checked his food stores, and then he checked them again. He went to the vixen's quarters, where Odette cleaned his muzzle while Mercy kept her back to him. When the moon rose, he returned to his roost. The paw was waiting in his bed. Odette! He cried. She appeared. Yes, husband? I thought I told you to get rid of this thing. She blinked at the paw. I buried it in the marsh. Well, it seems to have crawled back, hasn't it? Odette sniffed at the paw. I don't think it could crawl if it tried. Mr. Scratch huffed and stared at the thing. It was small, almost like it had belonged to a kid. A thought came to him, but he shook it away. And you say Mercy has not left your quarters? She hasn't moved a whisker in days, Odette said. Not since. Mr. Scratch growled, silencing her. He sneered at the paw. Drop this into the chasm where it belongs. Where it belongs, husband? Odette asked. He was about to answer. So it can be with its owner, but thought better of it. Screech! He whirled, ears swiveling. He thought he'd heard the scratching behind him, but that was ridiculous. The paw was right there, as dead as the kid at the bottom of the chasm. Go, he told Odette. This time, he watched from the high rocks as Odette carried the moldy paw to the chasm's edge and dropped it over the side. The paw was swallowed in mist. The next evening, Mr. Scratch hunted. He caught a jackrabbit, but its powerful hind legs kicked him in the chest, giving him a terrible gash. He broke the thing's neck, and even though it was already dead, violently shook it between his fangs. He dragged the remains back to the high rocks, where he feasted on its liver. Then he went to his roost to clean his wound and rest for the night. The next morning, a powerful hunger awoke him. He returned to the rabbit and nuzzled open its belly. He bit into something gray and cobwebbed and leaped back. The paw was sticking out of the rabbit's stomach. Mr. Scratch whirled, hackles rising, snarling toward the corners of his rocky den, searching for the intruder, but all he could smell was his own lilac scent. Dark thoughts crept into his mind. Paws didn't just come back to life. If they did, then any number of other creatures he'd sent to the underwood would have come crawling back to take revenge on him. He bounded to the vixen's quarters. "Which of you put that paw in my food?" He realized his jaw was trembling and clamped his teeth to steady it. Odette scrambled to her paws. "I would never, husband." Mercy lay still. He wanted to grab her and shake her, just like he had the rabbit, until she looked at him, spoke to him, but instead he steadied his breath. Odette had always been loyal. Even Mercy had killed her own son for him. They would never betray him. They loved him too much. "Anything is better than you." "Shut up," he hissed. Odette cowered. I didn't say anything, husband." Mr. Scratch thought a moment. "I want you to travel west," he told her, "to the chasm's end. I want you to descend to its base and make sure that that boy's body is still there." "But," Odette said, "but that will take days." He stared at her. She bowed. "I'll return as soon as I can," and she set off. Mr. Scratch returned to his roost, where he took up the paw and carried it deep into the marshes. He dug open a swath of mud, dropped the paw inside, and covered it up. He scanned the area to see if anyone was watching. The bog was empty. "That's the end of it, then," he said, and returned to his kingdom. Sleep would not come for Mr. Scratch that night. The moon was too bright. The wolves were silent. His restless heart beat strange images into his head. The corpse of a three-legged kid dragging itself out of the mouth of the underwood, broken bones jutting out of its fur, a stir in the darkness, and Mr. Scratch's many other dead children crawling out after. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Mr. Scratch awoke with a start. His ears spasmed, trying to determine if the sound had been real or some sleepless delirium. Scritch, scritch, scritch. He leaped up and bounded toward the eastern stone. Nothing. "Odette!" Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound came from the west now. He ran through the circle of rocks. Again, nothing. "Mercy!" Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound came from the north. He bolted around the circle of stones to the other side, but found nothing there. "Huh," he said. "I buried your little paw, and now you don't have it to frighten me any more." He laughed into the night, then fell quiet, listening. The stars pulsed with his heartbeat. A shape caught his eye in the moonlight. Something was hopping across the hill. "Odette," he whispered, but the shape did not come up the hill. Instead, it hobbled toward the caves that wound through the core of his kingdom. Mr. Scratch squinted. His hair prickled. The thing was too small to be Odette. Moonlight gleamed on its bloody fur. It only had 3 legs. He backed away from the edge. The scratching began again. Scritch, scritch. To the west. Scritch, scritch, scritch. To the north. Scritch, 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 screech. Mr. Scratch whirled. "Come out! Face me!" A paw crawled from behind one of the rocks. It was covered in cobwebs and maggots. It lifted and flopped, digging its claws into the earth and slowly drawing closer, closer. Mr. Scratch's heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. "You may have tricked my senses, but let's see you protect that 3-legged creature." He bounded out of his roost, down the rocks to the scraggly hill. He followed the trail of blood and triple paw prints to the cave. "I know you're in there." "In there, in there, in there." I don't know how you survived that fall, but I promise that this you will not survive. Survive, survive, survive. Mr. Scratch gripped his claws into the soil, and he bounded inside. A howl pierced through the darkness. Aroo! It echoed deep, waking the shadows with ruffles and shrieks. The cave ceiling bled a mess of black that bent midair and came screeching toward him. No. The shadows consumed Mr. Scratch. Wings batted his eyes. Claws tore his nose. Fangs hissed in his ears. He could see something ahead between the frantic bodies. 2 fox ears sticking out of a shallow pool. He fought through the shrieking chaos. He would seize that crippled kid and shake it to death like Mercy had failed to do. He lashed his teeth, tearing the bats from his sides. He would kill his son so that no one would know he could sire a kid like that. More bats clung to his fur, tearing, biting, shrieking. He pressed through them. The vixens of the land would respect him. The bats sank in their teeth, ripping away tufts of fur, of skin. He would grow his kingdom. Mr. Scratch stumbled, his ears deafened by 1,000 shrieks. He refused to lose a fight to his own pathetic son. Once the last of the bats had fluttered into the night sky, the stars sparkled on nothing but blood and tufts of black fur. And Wooly rose from the water with a gasp. 2. 3 nights earlier, Mia gave up trying to escape. She had shaken the trap, tried prying open its silver jaws where her paw was scrunched, even tried biting the sliver that held the jaws together. If she could just get her teeth around it like Miss Potter's fingers had, she could get the trap to release. But her teeth kept slipping, and the trap kept thunking to the ground, sending bolts of pain through her hind leg. Mia whimpered, wondering how her mom had to put on such a brave face when she'd been trapped. Moms must be stronger, she guessed. Now that the rain had cleared, the high whine of insects drilled into Mia's ears. Was she cursed? It felt as if every fox kid who came near her was doomed to die. Elfie, Marley, Busy, Roa. She accepted that her siblings were gone now, taken by the yellow. But she couldn't accept that Wooly was dead too. She should have listened to him and headed east across the hills. She had wanted to lead them away from the humans, but instead had led them to something much worse, Wooly's own father. How could a fox be so cruel to other foxes? Mia laid her head in a puddle and closed her eyes. She waited for the humans to come. Mia woke to a sound. Squeak! Squirk! Squee! It was wet and squishy and squirmed through her ears. She turned away from it, and the trap pulled, sending another jolt through her leg and into her teeth. She whimpered and settled again. The sound continued. Squirk! Squeeze! Squish! She lifted her head and found a hairy clump of moss coiled with maggots. She was about to nip at it, to tell it to stop its squirming and let her die in peace, when she noticed the thing had claws, 4 thick black ones, cracked to bits. Mia was so woozy with pain, it took her a few moments to see what it was. It was a fox's paw, rotten with rain. The paw had been chewed through, and not only by maggots. Mia felt the pain in her hind paw, right at the spot where this paw was cut off. The last fox to get caught in this trap must have gnawed through his own paw to escape, and he had left a part of himself behind. Mia sat up painfully, jangling the trap. Darkness overtook her heart as she stared at her own trapped paw. Could she do that? In order to save her own skin? With Wooly dead and her mom missing, was it even worth it? She bit experimentally into her back ankle and yipped. She bit again, and red flashed through her eyes. She let go until the pain faded. She couldn't do it. She couldn't force her teeth to cut her own skin. She took a deep breath and attacked her foot again, shaking her head back and forth. I wouldn't do that if I were you, a familiar voice said. Mia looked up, ears perked. Uli. Uli was there, standing in front of her. It's not easy having 3 paws, he said. Besides, you're gonna need all of them. Mia blinked to make sure he was real. I thought you were dead, she whispered, afraid that if she spoke any louder, he would vanish. So did I, he said. Lucky for you. I seem to be hard to kill. I'm like my dad that way. Mia would have laughed were she not in shock. Uli was always at his funniest whenever he came close to dying. I don't know if you are real or not, she said, but if you are, help me. Uli sniffed at the trap. How? Mia said. She remembered how Miss Potter's fingers had released her mom's paw. She pointed with her muzzle. Maybe if you hold this part down. Uli pinned the jaws to the ground with his forepaw, while Mia used her small front teeth to jerk and tug at the silver sliver. It wiggled loose, bit by bit, until the silver jaws shrieked and then fell open. She stretched her hind paw, her toes, but then a sharp pain made her pull back, sucking through her teeth. She was hurt, but she was free. She blinked at Uli. He was still there, the darkening muzzle, the sunset eyes, the scent of flower buds. She said, I'm not imagining you. He laughed. I hope not. He touched his nose to hers, and a tingling spread through her muzzle and straight to her heart, which started to beat happy again. Mia stared at the trap on the ground, its jaws open, as harmless as a dead snake. What's wrong? Uli said. You're free. The trap had opened so easily. If Mia had known this trick when her mom's paw was caught, then she could have saved her. She never would have gone through any of this. It's nothing, she said. Don't worry about it. Her ankle had swollen to the size of an apple, but it didn't feel like any bones were broken. She got up and tried a few steps on her injured paw. Ow, step. Ow, step. Ow. Uli smiled. You're lucky. I don't make you cross through a swamp or climb any hills right now. Mia scowled and then softened. Fair. She collapsed to her side. How did you survive that fall? Are you invincible or something? Because that would have been good to know. Uli smiled his lopsided smile. My mom snuck down to the caves the night you told her I was there. He'd been shivering in the pool when the whisper came. Uli? Mom? He was so excited to hear her voice that he'd splashed out of the water and then had to lie flat until the bath settled again. After his mom had cleaned the mud from his fur, she gave him the squirrel she'd brought from the stores. Uli, she said, staring at his stump, your poor little leg. It's okay, Mom, Uli said brightly. Now I don't have to carry it around anymore. His mom hadn't laughed like Mia had, but she was a mom. It was her job to worry about him. While Uli ate the squirrel, she told him how Mia had faked an injury to figure out which vixen was his mom. Pretty smart, Uli said. Yes, his mom smiled. Pretty too. Uli just wrinkled his muzzle and swallowed more innards. Long before the squirrel was finished and before his gurgling stomach was full, he stopped eating. He stared at the squirrel's remains. He may have had his mom back, but they weren't safe. They still needed to find a way to escape the Lilac Kingdom. Uli remembered that Mr. Scratch had wanted Uli's mom to kill her own son. Aren't you still hungry? His mom asked, nosing the squirrel closer. No, Uli said, stomach whining. I mean, yes, but we need the blood. He told her his plan. They sniffed through the caves until they found an opening into the chasm with a lip of rock that jutted out into the mist, right beneath the vixen's quarters. Then they returned to the cave's entrance, where Uli rolled around on the squirrel's remains. Mercy grabbed him by the scruff and dragged his blood-soaked body up to the hill. Mia's mouth hung open. So you pretended to die when your mom shook you? Yup, Uli said. And then she dropped you onto the rock sticking out into the chasm? Uh-huh. What if she'd missed? She didn't. Wasn't that terrifying? Uli shrugged. Sure, but it's easier playing dead than being dead. Well, yeah, but Mia smiled when she realized something. You didn't even hiccup. No, I did, he said, laughing. But I held it in. It hurt. She snorted and shook her head in admiration. Why were you able to do that then but not all the other times? Because I knew if I hiccuped, it might get my mom killed, or you. Mia smiled, then stared at a puddle. She was quiet a moment. My mom left me. Uli's ears perked. When I got caught by the human, my mom ran and hid in a bush and wouldn't come out. Then she fled into the forest the moment she couldn't smell me, like she just gave up. Uli hopped close. She didn't give up, he said. She just didn't know you were way too smart to be killed by a dumb human. He gave her his lopsided smile. She gave one back. Welp, she said, hefting herself to her paws and wincing. What are we waiting for? She pointed her nose northward and took a step on her swollen paw. Ow! Ouch! It's gonna take me forever to walk. We can't leave yet, Wooly said. What? Why this squib knot? My mom's still back in the Lilac Kingdom, he said. Oh, right. Mia suddenly felt very afraid. How are we going to get her away from Mr. Scratch? Uli shook his head. I have no idea. They sat in silence. Even with two of them, they weren't strong enough to win a fight against a full-grown fox. They were both missing a paw, at least for the time being. Blatch, Uli said. What's that smell? Oh, that, Mia said. She looked at the moldy paw. You don't want to know. She continued to stare at it, hip-quirked. The paw was all shrunk up, almost like a kid's paw. I think I have an idea, she said. 3. 3 nights later. After the bats had flapped into the night, after there was nothing left of Mr. Scratch save blood and tufts, after Wooly hopped out of the cave, Mia and Mercy joined him from the rocks. The 3 foxes sat and cleaned themselves. Wooly's mom licked the squirrel blood from his fur, while Mia cleaned away the cobwebs and maggots from between her claws. On the 3rd night of their plan, they'd made her paw look exactly like the disembodied paw that had been tossed into the chasm. Then she'd hidden behind the rocks of Mr. Scratch's roost, laid flat, and made her musty paw creep and flop toward him. Uli stared at the pools of blood, sparkling darkly with twilight. Is he really gone? We shouldn't count on it, Mercy said. Your father has returned from the dead before, and the bats left behind no bones. They all fell silent, waiting to see if Mr. Scratch would reappear. Anyway, Mia said, I can't believe that plan worked. I can, Mercy said. Challenge a fox's pride and he will start to lose his senses. He might even believe he sees the dead come back to life. The wind swept in, cleaning away the lilac scent. The 3 looked out over the rocks, the cliff, the marsh, the hill. Do we stay here? Uli said. Mia wrinkled her muzzle. No, Mercy said. This is a foul place. Wind surrounded himself with difficult terrain, slopes and stones and badgers and wolves, so that no other foxes would challenge him. He feared if they did, he would be beaten. Where do we go then? Mia asked, gazing across the chasm toward the many paths that led north. That's up to you, Mercy said. I want to go back to the boulder fields, Wooly said. His mother smiled sadly. Mia, would you give us a moment? Oh, Mia said, hopping up. Yeah, of course. Yes. She hobbled down the hill. Wooly's mom looked on him with shining eyes. His heart beat uncertainly. Once again, he knew what she was about to say, and he wanted to bite her whiskers to keep her from saying it. I thought the moment you set out alone, she said, that you would die, that your paw would get the best of you, that something would catch you, or you'd starve. I almost did die, he said, a lot. Yes, But here you are. She stepped close. I'm very proud of you, Wooly. He couldn't look at her. Instead, he stared at his one forepaw, at the dark fur growing along his chest and leg. He was getting bigger, but he didn't feel any braver. He sniffed. I want to go home where it's safe. Uli, darling, his mom said. Home was never safe, not for any of us. He thought back on the stone den, the hawks, his sisters, the terrible itching. How even the nice part came crumbling down once his father's shadow darkened their den's entrance. Almost nowhere is safe for a fox, his mom continued. And yet, she nuzzled his chin into the air. You came to the Lilac Kingdom, the most dangerous place of all, and you made it safe. You outsmarted your father. But I didn't do anything, he said, staring at his paw again. I only saved Mia in the forest because she told me what to do. I only swam in the swamp when she taught me how. And when we came here, I hid in the cave, too scared to come out. It sounds to me, his mother said, like you acted at the exact right moment, overcoming your fear and doing what was needed to save yourself and Mia and me. He looked at his mom then, at the snip in her ear, at the gray tufts in her fur. He never imagined her as someone who needed saving. She had always been the one to protect him from the dangers of the world. You've been fighting so long to survive, she said. You haven't realized you've grown up. You're too big for the boulder fields now, and too brave. His mom stepped close and seemed to shrink before Woolly's eyes. She no longer stood tall above him. Their noses were the same height. His head was too high for her to lay her muzzle between his ears. Everything you've done has been twice as difficult, she said. Now, tears streamed down her cheeks. I want you to go and live a life that's twice as sweet. Her face wavered in his eyes. Where will you go? She looked west. I need to check on your sisters. Wind made me leave them behind in the den, and I'm worried about them. Uli sniffed and laughed. I'm not. They're pretty tough. He and his mom looked at each other. She pressed her muzzle close to his. He felt her warm fur, her breath, the flutter of wet eyelashes. And then, long before he was ready, she pulled away. I can't wait to tell your sisters what you've grown into, she said. She licked him once on the nose and then padded off into the night. He watched her grow smaller and smaller and smaller until she vanished behind a hill and did not appear again. You ready to get out of this place yet? Mia called up to him. Uli stood and sighed, taking his eyes from the horizon. Yeah. He hopped down the hill. Thanks for helping me save my mom, he told Mia. Even if it was just so I could say goodbye. When she didn't respond, he looked at the expression on her face. Something had broken inside her. He could see it. His mom had just fought and schemed to protect him. But Mia's... I'll help you look for your mom, he said, if you want. Mia gave him a sad smile. That would be nice. He nodded. You know, Mia, he said, heart pounding. You're better than any family. She snorted. You're weird. The clouds began to break, and shafts of silvery light cut toward the ground, burning away the grays and reawakening the autumn colors. Are you hungry? Uli said. Let's go hunt something. How the squeep are we supposed to do that? Mia said. You're missing a forepaw, and I can't walk on my hindpaw. Right, Uli said. That's gonna be a problem. The foxes trotted north around the chasm, through the sunrise and beyond. They came to a wide grass valley awash in greens, save the two flickering foxes, one leaping as badly as the other. The first snowflakes started to fall. Phew, the beta said. So Mia and Uli lived happily ever after. The little one's heart lifted. Not quite, the storyteller said from the cavern. The story isn't finished. The little one's heart wilted. The antler wood had reached a darkness now that seemed impossible. The stars had winked out, and the moon was in hiding. The trees were deathly quiet. "I must warn you," the storyteller said softly. "Not all kids will survive to the end." "But," the beta swallowed. "There are only 2 kids left." The storyteller said nothing. The beta's whisker twitched. "I'm out of here. I'm going to pretend that was the ending so I can sleep tonight." She padded toward the den, then stopped and looked back at the little one. "You coming?" The little one's ears flattened. She looked from her sister to the cavern and then back again. She wanted to hear the end of the story, but she didn't want to be left in the antlerwood all alone. "You know the way home," the beta said, and padded away, tail fading into the night. One little fox. "You've lasted a long time, little one," the storyteller said. "Longer than I expected." This bolstered the little one's heart. Last chance to return to the den. Danger crept through the storyteller's voice. "Your siblings are all curled up with your mother. You could join them." The little one whimpered. The last part of the story might not end well. The darkness might crawl in through her ears and never leave. It wasn't too late. She could scurry out of the antlerwood. Right then, over the bones, beyond the cave, past the trap, beneath the branches, through the grass, across the creek, around the stone, over the log, to home. One little fox stayed put. "Very well." The storyteller's eyes flashed in the darkness. "Don't say I didn't warn you. One last part of the story. The scariest of them all, when Mia and Wooly must learn the true meaning of sacrifice."